Eley, I wanted to ask you a question. I'm always fascinated at how portrait photographers get subjects to like do what they want, right? Like that's always the trick. And it's interesting because you're the first person I've heard like where you don't want them to do anything. You want them to be like that first awkward moment. But you know, when you're working with people and you do want a certain look, right? You do want a certain emotion or you're trying to get something, do you have anything like any kind of any kind of process that you use, like find a common denominator, I mean, find a common ground to talk about, kind of ease into it, get them to open up? Do you find yourself struggling with that? Is something that comes natural to you? Do you have any like tricks in that world? What's your go-to on that?
Sure, I would say that for me, I think that is why I'm in the career path that I'm in, because it's not very hard for me to find some type of common thread between myself and somebody else. I don't care what you do, what you look like, who you are. I think that this is a good slide for us to have that conversation, because these are both everyday people. She's a painter, he's an illustrator and a DJ, but they both welcomed me into their space. And that's always a little awkward, I would say, in the beginning for individuals, not necessarily for me, but for like the individuals I'm working with, because they're like, oh, like, how do I look? Oh, what is she gonna think of my space? Why is she in my space? You know what I mean? But for me, I like to, of course, try to encourage them to just be the best self. I'm not a stylist by any means, but I might be like, oh, like that red looks beautiful on you. You know what I mean? Like I'm a little complimentative. Is that a word? Of like what's going on. And I help, arrange things like, oh, well, this might be nice for our photo here. I promise I'll put it back. You know what I mean? Because environmental portraiture is now, of course, like a whole nother layer of portraiture where you're in this environment, this encompassed environment. And so if I can put something on the screen and show them, like I'm a big fan of tethering so that people can see like exactly what's coming through. Then they're able to see like, oh, like I like that angle, or let's change this, or and then it's a collaborative process. Like they're involved with it as well. And so yeah, finding a common thread is a good jump off point. But I mean, I was on set the other day and like beautiful girl, like 24 years old. You can't take a bad picture of her. But we had a whole crew of people standing behind me, and she was like, ooh, you know what I mean? So like, if I have to get on the ground and start barking like a dog, like I'm gonna do it, because at the end of the day, it's like we're creating pictures, we're having fun, like we're creatives, let's have fun. You know what I mean? So I don't mind bringing that energy to set and just like being bubbly. But I also like, I know my buddy Jared Christian's in the audience right now. I'll also like be like, okay, this is the job, we need to execute. You know what I mean? So it just depends on like what's happening in front of me as to like how we can kind of create whatever magnificence is going to come through the lens. I would say that as far as like this kind of studio scenario, to the expansion of environmental, to the expansion of how do I do something with this like as a professional career, that's this where we are right now is a good expression of that, because this is me working with now like a like a quote unquote like person of interest. This is Chris Lee. He's an actor. He's in Hamilton from Chicago and Legacies and a couple other shows. And for me, it was like a matter of like, I love the studio, but I'm bored of the studio now. So now I want to like zoom out. I want to see what your life is. I want to see who you are. I want to like back up a little bit and showcase like line, shape, and form and these components coming together. But here in this expression, these are like 1, 2, 3, 4 photos of like I don't know, like a 10-piece series that we did that was more of an editorial expression of this individual. And for me, I really love this trajectory that I'm headed in, because it's looking at the duality of people. It's looking at like, oh, well, he can be like kind of edgy and like Atlanta like gangster with his cigar and his like red top, but he could also be this like super fun like performer, you know what I mean, like happy and
Yeah.
energetic. So for me to be able to like say this is one side of a person, but they also encompass this, is important to me at this point, because we're dynamic beings, everyone is. And so I think that there's more to us than just one layer.
Yeah, and it's nice when this was for a publication for a client.
This was for him. This is for like his
Okay.
PR, like for his press release information or content that is going to go out, just kind of promoting him and what he's doing, because he's a musician
Yeah.
outside of like what he does in theater and on film.
So it's great when you, like you said, have the opportunity to make several different types of pictures in different settings to really showcase more of who the person is. Like telling a story in one picture is really hard, and sometimes that's all we get with if you're assigned something from a publication or a magazine or a newspaper. You may only get, literally, they might tell you beforehand, like, we're only going to use one picture. When you have a spread, I feel like it just opens up so much more. In a situation like this where you're being hired, there's a purpose for these pictures. They're for him, or they're for the client, whatever. How do you go about still infusing your own creative sensibility, your own like sense of the artist that you are into the work? That's one of our biggest challenges, is how, no one wants to completely sell out and hate what they're doing, so how do you still take the job, please the client, yet make yourself happy and make images that you actually want to put in your portfolio?
So, I mean, every job is different, right, Ray? But I would say, I don't know, maybe I've been blessed a little bit in the fact that people have given me the opportunity to do more or less what I want to do. This is an
Mhm.
example of where he was like, I trust you, I like your vibe, but prove it to me. You know what I mean? And so for my personal process, I love the concept of serendipity and seeing what the light is doing or seeing what the space offers and all of those things coming together. But leading up to it, I also work with a team. You know what I mean? I have stylists, I have
Right.
photo assistants, I have makeup artists and things of that capacity. And to make sure that the crew is all kind of on brand of whatever I'm like thinking in my little pea brain at the moment, I'm a big person of like mood boards. So with these 4 photos, there's a whole like scrolling page of like different things that are like building the way in which I'm thinking about this. Like, okay, like I want to have like
Hmm.
this kind of 70s aesthetic mixed with like hip hop, you know what I mean?
Right.
I want to have like this like bright and vibrant thing mixed with like a little bit of edge. So I'll make sure to be able to show um examples of what it is that I want to do that aren't necessarily these photos, right? Of
Mhm.
something else showing like this is the reference, guys, and then pulling that together and then having that trust, I think, comes from being able to connect with that individual in front of your lens the day of. You know what I mean? Like I had conversations here or
Yeah.
there with Chris leading up to this shoot of like, hey, this is the vibe, here's the mood board, yada yada, whoop de whoop. But really it came into the day of him being open to like receive me and
Mhm.
me being able to say like, I got you. You know what I mean? So there's a little bit of back.
Yeah. I want to move on to the next section. And so this is so it's a constant evolution. You start in the studio, then we get into environmental portraits, and now you're taking your portraiture into the sort of documentary realm, and you're doing street portraiture, right? Tell us about this. Was this pandemic era related? Were you doing this before?
Sure. I mean, both of these specific shots did come out of last year in the midst of the pandemic. And you'll see later on in some of these other photos that like they're more specific to what was happening in the pandemic. And I wanted to be able to record that in my own way. But
Mm.
for me, like, again, it's kind of like looking back at like, okay, this is the commercial entertainment side versus the documentary side. And I find these similarities where it's like, oh, am I looking at color theory? Yeah, sure, maybe a bit. But I'm also trying, I just think that like what I love about my work as I reflect on it is the ability to like make everybody look like a hero. The gentleman on the left was a passerby or vagabond. I guess we could call him homeless. And the person on the right is a celebrity, you know what I mean? And so for me, it's like, how do you honor and respect both souls? Because both people deserve a level of respect and space for whatever is going on in their life. You know what I mean? And so for
Yeah.
both of them to trust me again with my
Mhm.
camera to just say like, hey, like this is what we're doing today. It's a special space, and I want to make sure that I like honor that always. I never want to try to like showcase someone um where they don't look their best.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And just aesthetically, I don't know if there's ever been two more perfectly paired pictures side by side. It's like you said, the color juxtaposition of these is just, it's so awesome. It's really cool how, as you make more and more work as a photographer, you'll go back through and something will pop out and you'll be like, wow, I made another image. And then you can put them together and it just changes everything.
Right.
And you can tell a whole different story. But I love your sort of statement, your story behind these two together. I mean, that in itself is such an awesome, unexpected way of, furthering the story. When you didn't know when you were shooting these individually, right, that
Right.
they would be together or that you would shoot one or the other. But after you did and then put them together, this sort of new story presented itself, and now you're sharing that, and I think that's really a really awesome perspective to hear.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's,
Um,
go ahead.
no, I want to hear what you have to say. You're more important. This is your work. This is your stuff.
I don't know, right? It's already gone. I go a mile a minute. But looking at this slide, I think that's another kind of interesting thing that's come together. These were also created during 2020. You can see
It's a personal project, this stuff?
the one on
Or-
the left is from a personal project where I was like,
Okay.
okay, like it's the end of the world. What do we do? And so it's like, I got to document it. So I'm like out on the streets. I mean, I'm sure my parents would hate me for this, but I'm out there like running around, probably like not 6 feet away from people. And thankfully I'm
Yeah.
okay. But, I had my mask on and I had like a little like camera like on and like was like, okay, like I want to talk to these people, because you could see in this moment, like the early pandemic, that like people were concerned, they were scared, they were uncomfortable. And then I met this gentleman on the red backdrop where he was like sitting on a bench and he was like waiting for like his ride to go home. And I noticed that he was like in a security officer thing, but he just seemed like approachable. So I went up to him and I was like, hey, like I'm Eley, this is what I'm doing. You mind if I talk to you for a second? And he was like, sure. And like, I don't know what allowed me to get him to open up, but he just talked to me for a little bit. And I was like, okay, well, tell me about who you are. And he was super excited to have someone ask him that, I think. And he was like, well, this is what I do during the daytime, but at night I'm actually studying to be a nurse so that I can be in there on the front line fighting with this
Wow.
pandemic. You know what I mean? And so I was like, God, like I have to make your picture. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I was like, because you have a mission. And I think that that's so cool because, like outside of his security code, he's just like, another dude passing by that maybe someone wouldn't stop. So to be able to say like, you're of importance in my mind, I want to be able to share that with everybody else. So I was working on the project of like walking around the Atlanta streets and documenting the individuals that I saw that caught my attention in the middle of the pandemic. And I wanted to be able to say like, how can I bring the studio outside with me portably? And that
Okay.
expression of that by being like, let me just wrap this wood in like whatever colored backdrop I'm feeling for the day and go with it. Versus the one on the right was a commissioned assignment. And this wasn't necessarily like they said like, oh, they did not say, I saw this red piece, do this over here for this person. But that's just like where my brain was at the moment of like, this is a moment and this is something that I want to like be able to freeze in time and bring a little more attention to. So if you look at the rest of that like orange series, it's more like traditional like environmental editorial stuff. It was shot for Atlanta Magazine. But before I left, I did my research. I was like, this guy looks like this, and we're going to his backyard. And I think that the orange will pop off of the green kind of thing. So I had that loose concept in my mind. But that was the last shot of the day. Like we did a bunch of beautiful stuff on the docks and whatever else at his home. But I was like, look at where the light is right now. And he just happened, he's deaf. And I don't know, that might not mean anything, but he was like deaf and he was kind of like in his own moment, just like embracing and feeling the sun. And I was like, oh my God, put that orange backdrop behind him right now. You know what I mean? And then like, I was okay, like, hey, like, I didn't take it when he wasn't aware, but I was like, if you could just find that moment again, I thought it was so beautiful. And I'm glad that I asked for that because this is probably one of my favorite photos in my portfolio today. So, again, putting these together, it's just interesting because it's like, here's my personal style or where my brain's at in said moment or time. And then being able to bring that into like what got chosen for a commercial assignment was really cool to, again, have them like trust you. It's like, trust your gut.